I'm Nadira Tudor, and this is The Fall of Kabul, a soldier's story. Was it worth it? So I want to go back to the moment that you found out that Kabul had fallen, the fall of Kabul. Where were you and what went through your mind at that moment?
Wow, that was here. It was here in shape. I think at that moment, I felt really kind of depressed about it, if I'm being honest. I felt like at that moment, I was hoping against all get out that they were going to be able to withstand the Taliban, that they were going to be able to withstand everything that was being put on them and be able to pull together, mainly because I worked with those guys for a year and I really felt like they were some of the most resilient people I had ever met. And it was just it was disheartening and it was depressing. It was depressing. Mainly because I think for me, I I looked back at my experience in Afghanistan fondly. It was difficult to be away from my family, but at the same time, I felt like what I was doing mattered. I felt like there was something about the. I mean, it was overused, the winning hearts and minds and all that crap. But at that time, I really felt like that it mattered to me to leave things better than where I found them when I got there. And when I got there, so much of my job was working with the Afghans on a daily basis. I saw them evolve and become more efficient in their own way. And so that was years ago. I was there in 2011. I think since then, I had hoped that everything that I had worked on was going to continue and that they would continue to develop and they would continue to. So when it all just stopped and it all fell, at that moment I thought, well, part of it was selfish, I guess. Part of it was I thought, what was it all worth? I mean, why did I go there and spend a whole year trying to help them out? Part of me was upset at them, kind of for not withstanding the onslaught and just standing their ground. And then part of me was mad because I really felt like that we kind of abandoned them a little bit. But then I would always counter that last thought by thinking, yeah, but they had plenty of years to kind of pull it together. So I had a lot of emotions, I guess. Ultimately, it was depressive. I didn't want to see them as failing. I wanted to feel like they were going to succeed at the end. And then all that time that we spent, really as a coalition, I mean, it was a lot of different countries, not just the U.S., mattered. Like it led someplace. It was going to result in something that would be better than it all started with. And so yeah, I was sad, like everybody, and a bit mad.
And you remember the news that day. It was minute by minute, hour by hour.
Yeah, yeah.
Total confusion. You must have had visualizations over the course of that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I mean, days later when people were clinging to planes and falling off and everything, I could find myself being back at the airport. Because when I was in Afghanistan, I spent a whole year at the Kabul airport. I mean, I was at that time called the ISAF Joint Command, IJC. So that was sort of the three-star command in 2011. And so I was at the airfield all the time. I flew out of that airfield on the civilian side a couple times. And so for me, I, I had it all in my head. I used to drive around the airstrip to go from base to base. And the Afghan components that I worked with and the Afghan security forces were on the other side of the airbase. So I was always there. So for me, I remembered the sights, the sounds, the smells, the crowds. On a good day, Kabul was always a little crazy anyway. But I think for me, it was easy to put myself there, and that was a long time ago. So yeah, it was just very difficult. It was difficult to see the chaos and feel like I had some role in making it not chaotic years before, and kind of looking back on it now, and back in 2022. I mean, for me, or 21, for me, it was hard to not feel like I could have done something about it, but there was really nothing to do about it. And in the aftermath, there were so many people that were reaching out to people in NATO. My colleagues in NATO up in Brussels, but then here too, asking for help and trying to get out of there, asking for help and trying to evacuate. And it was just kind of chaotic. So I feel like for a military person, chaos is not your friend. You know, you want to feel like that things are organized, and that was not organized. It was just chaotic.
I'm going to take you back now to when you first joined the military. Um, was it part of your family history? Why did you choose to join it?
Okay.
You know, what attracted you about the military? And the reason why I'm asking that is I want to understand what your journey's been and how you feel post Afghanistan. So let's go back.
Okay. I never really thought I would join the military. I came from a military family, grandparents, uncles, my father. I was kind of anti-military for the longest time. Like I was a musician, I was an artist, and in 1989-90, with the Persian Gulf and Desert Shield and Storm, I went to protest. You know, so I was just not a military person. I was never going to be. So it's funny to me, 27 years later, that I find myself a career military person. I think what I was attracted to initially was the idea that I had fond memories of my grandfather who would talk about the camaraderie, the teamwork, and a lot of the things that I admired about my music work was all the collaboration work I did. I used to do a lot of accompanying. I worked in ensembles. I worked with singers and opera and musical theater, and I loved the whole idea of putting everything together and putting the pieces up together and then having a performance and then being able to kind of look back at it later on and enjoy the process. And so I think the military for me initially was more of I need a paycheck. I need some way to pay the bills. And music was not working because I just couldn't teach very well. And as a musician, you have to be able to teach. So I looked at the military initially as well, I mean, I think I could dig the whole camaraderie thing. I would learn some different skills, and then in 4 years I'll get out and I'll go do something different. And I'll know by then I will have found myself, and I will now be a grown up. I'll know what I want to be when I grow up. And the funny thing is that the longer I stayed in the military, the more I kind of really enjoyed it and felt kind of safe in this sort of system that it has of um, you work hard, you get someplace, there's ranks, there's the ability to travel. I really wanted to travel, and I grew up in a very small town in the southeast in South Carolina and really wanted to kind of see the world. So that was the other aspect of it too. So that was my initial take on it. And then through the years, I have kind of gone through the ranks and enjoyed the camaraderie and enjoyed the overall idea of trying to make something better. The years of counterinsurgency were difficult, but in going to the Iraqs and the Afghanistans and things like that, I always found myself enjoying the teamwork part of it and enjoying the camaraderie part of it. And then when I finally made it into my career progression in public affairs, I finally found the creative outlet. So for me, now I have camaraderie and I have this artistic, very creative profession, and it was kind of a beautiful marriage. So now, 18 years into that, it's just such a way of life for me that it'll be difficult when I retire. And I think that's inevitably going to happen, but I'll have to find some other creative way to do that and have the teamwork part of it. So,
when you look at the root of what you do, though, and I think that's fascinating, and some of the reason why we're here, is every soldier that I've ever spoken to, and you know that I've worked alongside the military for many years as well, talks about that camaraderie, talks about that family environment that they have, a family of choice in some ways. Yet you go through a horrific experience like Afghanistan. How do the two tally?
oh well, in terms of just how do you meet up the camaraderie with something that happens? Well, all right. I think that there's a all right. It's horrible when you find yourself in say, the aftermath of an IED blast, or you're in a situation that goes horribly south and you have to find your way out of it. But in all of those cases, you find yourself committed to the idea that the person to your right and left that you know and you've become almost like family with, particularly when you're deployed, that they'll have your back and that they will make sure that you're okay and you're going to make sure that they're okay. There's some weird adrenaline rush when you're in that moment. I was in I was in Iraq. A year before I was in Afghanistan, and we were in a case. It was a situation. It was a feel-good event. It was a turnover between the sort of U.S. coalition control of that area, and it was a transfer over to the Iraqi security forces. And so, the governor, I think, was there, the mayor was there, my boss went, I went with him. We had downgraded from our protective gear, our body armor, that type of thing. And anyway, and at the end of the event, it got chaotic. Like, people started to riot and people were throwing things, and we went from a situation of everything is very cool to you need to get in the vehicle and go now, otherwise it's going to go horribly. And public affairs, I had journalists with me at the time, and I had to go get the journalists, and I almost missed getting into the vehicle and getting out of there because they had to go that quick. And it was terrifying. I mean, I was honestly very scared. But then I remember getting back to the base and going to the chow hall and grabbing a cup of coffee and felt this weird sense of terrific adrenaline going and kind of a high. And we all talked about it and we all kind of commiserated and talked about how crazy it was. And as scary as it had been, I look back on it now and I don't really remember the scary part of it. I just remember the crazy part of it. So I don't know. I think sometimes the camaraderie of the military is super integral to the profession and how you survive things that are bad, because you kind of depend on the person on your right and left to kind of help you through it. And for me, I think the more you talk about it with people that have also gone through it, the better off you are in the long run, because then it's not an isolated thing. It's not something that you're trying to shelter inside you. And I think that's, for me, that's important. I have to talk about it. And I talk about everything as a career. So, for me, I find it's easier to break into the conversation. It's more difficult down the road. But I think if you do it initially, then you're better off.
And when you look at Afghanistan, you obviously would have experienced incidents where you saw things that you didn't want to see. You experienced things that you didn't want to. Do any spring to mind that really affected you and have changed you?
Two come to mind. One, I didn't see, but I was kind of in the aftermath of it. I was in Afghanistan, 2011, and there was this. They would call it a green on blue or blue and green. Never get those two colors right, but basically, it was an Afghan security forces colonel who was a pilot, senior person, who I knew people who had worked with this gentleman on a regular basis. And so much of our job, in 2011 at least, was in partnership with the Afghan security forces. And so I mentored an Afghan security force colonel who was a public affairs officer, no background in it, and he was way older than me. But I was, as a major, I was his mentor. And so I spent all the time I could. And there were many cases that you would find yourself, I would find myself, the only American, the only coalition person in the room, save an interpreter, and in a room full of Afghan security forces. And I would try very, very diligently to remember, hey, things could go wrong. But right now, I'm trying to talk to people and I'm trying to articulate and help and guide and mentor and all those things. So it was all about being as comfortable as you could be in that situation. And the last thing you ever wanted to think about was something bad happening. Well, I was on a flight going from Mazar Sharif up in the north part of Afghanistan, RC, Regional Command North, back to Kabul. And mid-flight, the flight got turned around. And so for an inexplicable reason, we turned around and headed back up to Mazar Sharif. And I asked the crew chief what's going on. He said, we can't talk about it. I don't really know. You'll find out when you land. So I landed and I met up with the public affairs officer up there, German major, who I still know. We're friends. And he and I were talking about it. And apparently what had happened was that Afghan security forces colonel had been in a meeting with, I think, 10 to 12 other coalition forces members, in this case mainly U.S. Air Force, and he had just decided in the middle of the meeting to open fire, and he shot 8 of them dead, and then he shot himself. And after that, things got crazy. All of us that were working with the Afghan security forces on a regular basis immediately went to not only bring in your weapon, but you had your weapon loaded and you were ready to, at any point necessary, defend yourself and your colleagues. But the shock factor, I think, for me was because so much of my job was working with the Afghans that I found myself scared to go to meetings. I found myself going from a position of comfort, and this is this cool thing that we're doing right now, and we're working with the Afghans, to being worried that I'm going to go into a meeting one day and I'm not going to come out alive because at some point somebody's going to have a bad day, or maybe they got ordered to do something, or can I really trust these Afghans that I'm working with, you know? And it was an uncomfortable place. I mean, it was scary. Um,
How did you cope with that?
um,
Because you can't have relationships without trust.
you know, you can't. And I would tell myself, you know what, that was just that guy having a bad day, or maybe that guy, you know, I had to go to the place of, I trust these people because I work with them all the time, and I would like to think that they would tell me if something was wrong. And I can't not do my job. My wife would often joke that I, I, I would not tell her that I was working outside the base as much as I was, just because I didn't want her to worry about it. And when that happened,
But then you're losing trust in your personal life.
yeah, there's a bit of that, right? There's a bit of trying to tell white lies a little bit, and that I didn't want her to worry too much. I didn't want the kids to worry too much. But at the same time, you find yourself in a position of, yeah, I'm a horrible liar, you know. I mean, I'm a public affairs officer. I'm a communicator. I have to tell the truth. It's my mantra. So for me to keep a secret, you know, is some well, that kind of secret is very difficult. So it was hard to equate the two and connect the two dots for me for a long time there. For weeks, I was both scared and excited to go outside the wire, so to speak, and go and visit with my colleagues in the Afghan security forces. But it but at the same time, I knew that it was important for me to go. And at the end of the day, I wanted to believe that the camaraderie that I shared with my coalition colleagues, I also shared with the Afghan security forces that I was with. And if, at the end of the day, if it was going to happen, it was going to happen. I was just going to have to not worry about it, which is ironically enough what I felt when I was in Iraq the year prior to that. And I would go out on patrols on a regular basis and armored vehicles, and you were always worried about the specter of an IED attack. And you didn't know when or where those were going to occur. So you couldn't go out on the road every day and be worried that you were going to die. You just had to go out on the road and do it with the idea that, well, if it was your time, it was your time. So that incident was bad, and I eventually kind of overcame that hurdle. Things kind of calmed down a bit, and people were a little less worried about it. But the second one it was in my last 2 weeks of my year-long deployment, and at that point, you really just want to be as safe as possible. You don't want to do anything that would possibly be dangerous because you just want to go home on the freedom bird, they would call it, right? You would want to get on the victory flight back. And anyway, I was out on a trip downtown. I had my replacement, they called them AFPAC hands. It was somebody who would be trained in Dari and Pashto, and it was a public affairs person who was going to kind of take over where I'd left off. And so I was duty bound to take him downtown to go visit with Ministry of Defense and all the people that I knew so they could connect. And so we were on the way back. Kabul was always kind of crazy in traffic. There was this roundabout there, Masood Circle, that was just insane. People would get to that and go both directions. It was nuts. I was not driving. I had a young NCO that was driving, public affairs, Air Force. That was our driver. My counterpart was in the back. We had a 2-vehicle convoy. We were in basically armored Toyota Land Cruisers, which was our vehicle that we rode around in. And we were driving down the main road, and in front of us we could see looked like an old woman in the sort of blue burqa. Couldn't see her face, couldn't see anything. She was heavily veiled, and she was kind of ambling across the road. So turned to my NCO, he hit the brakes, so we would let her cross. She stopped briefly, and we thought she was just going to stay there. So he hit the gas, and as he hit the gas, she started walking again, and we hit her. And she rolled up under the vehicle on the front left side. NCO's panicking, he's freaking out. The crowd started to kind of close in on us and descend. People were yelling, throwing things. It was getting bad. My AFPAC hand in the back seat was asking if he could get out of the vehicle since he spoke Dari and Pashto, and he was going to try to argue with people and just let them know that we're going to take care of it. Meanwhile, we're on the radio trying to call the quick reaction force. I did not let him get out of the vehicle because people were angry. They were worried. They were upset. And, and who wouldn't be? Yeah. And eventually, long short of it is, the quick reaction force showed up. They provided a cordon. They went out and kind of called the police. The police came. They started talking to the crowd. They let us go. The lady was fine. She was a very elderly woman. She was being accompanied by her grandson, who was right behind her and didn't do anything, which that's a totally different story. But the whole point of it was, after that, I felt really, really horrible about it because this was some old woman that we hit, and we weren't going that fast. But at the time, all I could think is, it was just so crazy that I'm probably going to be involved with some investigation or something, and I'm not going to be able to leave. And at that point, I really just wanted to go home and see my family. So I was at the point of wanting to be part of the team, wanting to be there, but also wanting to leave and go home because I've been around, for a long time there. So it was just it was a crazy period. And then I felt horrible for this lady because nobody wants to get run over. But in the end, she was fine, and she made it, and I made it home, 2 weeks later. But it was just those two incidents I think stick back in my head. That last one is just silly and horrible. It's like a traffic accident. It's not something you think that you're going to be involved with when you're in a combat theater. But the first one I think was probably the most horrific one.
Very traumatic incidents.
Yeah, they are in different ways. I feel like the first one did way more to me in terms of making me wonder if maybe what I was doing was, it enters your mind, at least, I'm not sure with other nations, but in the U.S. side, you volunteer for it. It's something you weren't drafted to go do. You weren't conscripted to go do it. You volunteered to go do this job, and you do it. And then you realize at some point that it's super dangerous and something could go horribly wrong. And then when it does and you're not there, then you're kind of happy that you weren't in the room, right? But at the same time, you realize you could be in the room. And if you were in the room, it would just be over. Or worse, you would be injured in some horrible fashion and having to recover and deal with all that. So, yeah. Anyway.
You talked a lot about your job entailing working very closely with the Afghans, and certainly one of the challenges that the military had there, and correct me if I'm wrong, were the fact that they couldn't identify Taliban members because you couldn't differentiate between civilians and Taliban members based on the way they dressed necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
That made you even more vulnerable, didn't it, really?
Yes. You never really, unfortunate thing about that whole part of our military history now is that you couldn't always tell, and you weren't sure if the person that you were working with was on your side or the Taliban side or both sides, and that kind of made it very difficult. I think particularly for me, working with the mentorship role of it, you wondered, am I inadvertently giving trade secrets to somebody who's going to turn it around and do something bad to me and the people that I work with? I don't know. There was always that kind of ever-present worry. Or, the interpreter that I'm working with, is the interpreter also working with somebody bad? How much am I telling this person? You find yourself wondering if what you're telling whoever it is that you're working with is going to somebody that you wouldn't want to tell. And that was always the challenge with it. I think in the military, you want to think of good guy versus bad guy, the enemy versus us, right? And it never felt like that in that campaign. You never really, there were obvious Taliban, right? But then you always wondered if somebody was not so obvious Taliban or Makani or any of those agents. So That's difficult. And for me as a communicator, it was super difficult because I'm always trying to find the happy story. I'm trying to find the good story. I'm trying to find the silver lining. I'm trying to find the things that are going well. It's difficult to tell stories when things aren't going well.
And you obviously formed close relationships as well.
Yeah, yeah. I get very close to my interpreter, um, Aman. He was a uh, he was a son. He was, I think, the eighth son of a Ministry of Defense like general officer in the Afghan security forces, and he was the only one that didn't join the military. Now he was studying to be a doctor, and he got married. Yeah, while I was there, actually. He had asked for like a week or two off or something so that he could go and get married, which I was like, yeah, that's a big thing. Yes, you should take some time off. And and I didn't really think anything of it because why wouldn't you do that? Um, and we had conversations all the time because he spoke brilliant English. He was working as an interpreter during the day, and at night he was going to medical school. So I don't know when he slept. And the fact that he had a relationship and got married in the middle of all that, and his relationship, his wife now, I guess, was a doctoral student, I think, or something too. And I think at that point I was really particularly impressed with the fact that this is Afghanistan, a country that has had notorious problems with women's rights and ability to be educated and all that. And the fact that he was marrying somebody who was also educated, I was very impressed with. I thought that's the new Afghanistan. That's where the things are going. So I was really impressed. Well, at the end of that period of time, I was giving gifts. In fact, that was a funny experience in that I showed up to give gifts and say my goodbyes because I was redeploying back. And they somehow got wires crossed and told me that was not the day that we were supposed to do this. And they had nothing for me, and I had to come back. And by that point, soldier problems. I was worried about the fact that I had 20 kilos that could go on the plane, and I had it packed, and it was at 20 kilos. And I was worried about getting anything else because it was going to put me over the 20 kilos, and I would have to have key discussions internally over whether I was going to take this T-shirt back or whatever it was. Anyway, so I went over. I managed to get a ride. I went back over there the day that we were going to talk, and we exchanged gifts. And for me, we had exchanged a lot of tea. Like we drank a lot of tea over that year. So I had found these very cool teacups that were, you could put them in the back of a military vehicle and run over them with a tank, and they would probably be okay. Well, it was going to be a nice gesture. And so the colonel that I was working for and that I was mentoring gave me this beautiful woven mirror that I still have in my office. And I of course accepted it and then thought, how is this going to possibly make it back in my duffel bag? But I figured out a way because it's on my office wall now. But the one that really made me choke up was my interpreter, who gave he didn't give it to me. He gave it to it was a necklace. To this day, I don't know how much it's worth. I've never bothered to go get it appraised or anything, and it could completely, totally be fake. But it was this diamond-looking necklace that he gave to me to give to my wife because he wanted her to acknowledge his appreciation for the fact that I had spent that year over there and that I had helped him be able to go and get married and have this beautiful experience, and that he wanted her to acknowledge that his appreciation for the fact that while he was getting married and spending time with his wife and his family, I was away from my family. And honestly, I did cry. I didn't expect that. I wasn't expecting that level of connection. And I think for me, going back to where we started, that's the hardest part of it. Is that for me, I got to know these people as people. They were, with all the hopes and dreams and aspirations that anybody would. And to acknowledge the fact that watching the country fall apart, I realized that I knew people that were there that were possibly going to be irrevocably affected in the long term. And when I was there, they were all very hopeful. And they all I think that there was a sense of there were bad guys, Taliban, but at the end of the day, most people were pretty convinced that they were eventually going to figure it out and they were going to work it out. And I think at the moment that Kabul fell, my first thought was to Amman because I've never kept up with him. We lost touch. I'm horrible at social media, bad at, ironically enough, as a public affairs officer, it's embarrassing to say that, but I'm bad about that. And we lost touch through the years, and I don't know what happened to him, and I still don't know what happened to him.
How does that make you feel? Because you were very close, obviously.
We're really close. I feel like I let him down. Like being from America, being from the United States, having had a lot of privileges, we'll say, from having grown up in that country and traveled the world and married kids. I think for me, I always felt like I owed him the ability to have the same. And having not been there and then being powerless in this headquarters to do anything about it I felt impotent a bit in the fact that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything. And then the idea that I wouldn't even know who to call because I don't have his phone number. I don't have his email. There's no way to know. So, your memories are always strongest in that moment. And if you were to go back and try to recreate the same thing, it wouldn't be there the same. And that's just life. But for me, I still think of him very much as I did when we were riding on the bus, and he said, one day you should bring your wife and we'll go to Jalalabad and go look at pomegranates, because I had mentioned to him one day that my wife is a nut about pomegranates, and he told me that, well, they grow these enormous pomegranates in my country, and I would love for you to come back one day and we can go and see the pomegranate orchards, and it'll probably never happen.
It might never happen.
And that to me, I really hate glib, grim. I mean, I very much try. It's an odd thing to say as a military person, but you train and train and train. You hope that you never have to go to combat and do anything that's really horrific. You may have to, but at the end of the day, you can appreciate peace probably better than anyone. And so for me, I always thought there would be kind of long-lasting peace there. That there would always be little things that happen, but that on the whole, Afghanistan was on the up. And I don't think I can say that now. So for me, it's just very difficult to look back at that and wonder what happened to Amman. What happened to Colonel Abdul Hyde, who I worked with for 10 months. What happened to those folks? And I won't know. I don't know how I would begin to go and try to find that out. And part of me, honestly, is worried that maybe I don't want to find out. Because if I don't find out, in my mind, I can still go back to the happy place where everything was okay. Or at least better than it is right now. So, and that's just a difficult thing to get to. I'd like to believe in happy endings. But I don't think there was there. And that's difficult for me.
And if we go to the question of whether you think it was worth it, with the sacrifices that you've made, you don't want to think about Aman's future and where Aman is now. Was it worth it?
For me, it was worth it. I learned a lot. I think when you're in the military, my experience, when you're in the military and you go places that are dangerous and you have to confront your demons, you have to do them in a very, like, you go to bed at night and you think, I may not wake up in the morning. When I was in Iraq, we got rocketed all the time from Al Qaeda, and we were in a tiny base that, not the tiniest, but it didn't have a wide cordon, and so rockets could very easily go over the perimeter. And there was one time when I was there that somebody got rocketed in their containerized housing unit there too. They went to sleep one night and they didn't wake up the next day because it got hit by a rocket. So I would go to bed there and Afghanistan too, and say, well, if I get up tomorrow morning, it's a good day, and um, and you think about that danger ever presently, and you kind of have to get comfortable with it so that you can just live and enjoy life. Um, I got to the point where in Afghanistan it felt normal. I felt I was away from my family, and that was horrible. But after a while, I got to the point where I felt like every day was a new kind of new adventure. There was some new challenge to it, and I grew as a result. I became less concerned about death because I was terrified before that point. I'm not a particularly religious person, so for me, what happens after I die is a big mystery, and I don't even want to speculate. But the idea that I'm not like an atheist, I don't believe there's nothing, but I just don't know. It's the unknown. So I became comfortable with death. I became comfortable with the idea that every day was worth something. Um, and I came back from that experience just deeply appreciative for any experience I could have with my family, with my friends, some new place I could go. So I grew as a person. So to answer your question, for me, it was worth it on a personal level because I came back a much stronger, resilient person. Um, I came back understanding at least a little bit better a culture that I had always I'd seen in the movies and books, but never thought I would go to Afghanistan. Um, and I just deeply admired the people there. I found myself really appreciative for the fact that I got to know some of them very well. And for that, I feel like I'm a better person. And the other part of it too is, sometimes you see things you can't unsee. You see poverty on a level that you've never seen before, and you come back from it having grown a bit because you think, as bad as things could be, I'm not there. I'm not having to deal with what they're dealing with, and I'm not trying to be glib by saying that. I feel like you come back way more appreciative than you maybe were before. And so for me, I just feel like the whole experience made me a better version of myself. In saying that, I hate situations where you spend a lot of your time trying to make something better and then looking back on it realize that even though you did, it wasn't better. Or maybe it was better, but now it's not better. And that's the thing I have the hardest time with right now. So to answer, was it worth it? For me, it was worth it, but I wanted it to be worth it for other people, and I wanted it to be worth it for Afghanistan. As much as that sounds like I'm a Hallmark greeting card, I really wanted them to be happier as a country and safe because I have a daughter, I have a daughter who's now grown, and I I went there confronted with the fact that for Afghan women and for girls, they had such a horrible time with it. And when I was there, I made every effort to go to like the Afghan bazaars where women would be promoting their craft, and it was all going back into education. And I really deeply believed in that because I thought, what if that was my daughter? What if that was my wife? I would want them to have a better opportunity. So for me, I just, I felt like all of that stuff was starting to churn the right direction, and things were going right. Um, and now I do wonder, if they will ever get back to where they even were 10 years ago. And I feel like at the time I had a hand in making it better, but it didn't go better after that. So it does feel a little bit like it's a lost bit of time. But I think how I'm trying to take it now is, as much as I think it sucks that happened, I know that it mattered to the people that I talked to when I was there. And I take some solace in that it mattered at that time. And, maybe once you've tasted the freedom bug or you've tasted some aspect of something better, you can't remove that from your brain. You can try to drive it out of people, but, once people know what something else looks like or feels like or tastes like or whatever, It's hard to get that out of their head. And I have to believe that those people will be suppressed by the Taliban and others, but they are irrevocably changed in a positive light. They just have to have the right variables in there to get back to that, get back on the same path. So that's where I am.
Thank you for joining us on The Fall of Kabul, A Soldier's Story. For more episodes and in-depth exploration, visit us on YouTube and on podcast streaming platforms.